So when you finally make that tough decision to walk away from someone, you're actually triggering something way, way deeper than just sadness or disappointment. We're about to look at what's really happening inside their head, and trust me, it's probably not what you think. Because this isn't just about feelings. This is a full-on neurobiological event. We're going to break down the actual science of it, from their brain chemistry all the way down to their most primal, deep-seated psychological defenses. So on the surface, you think, okay, they're sad, they're disappointed, makes sense. But what's really going on? It's a neurobiological crisis. Their brain is reacting based on programming that is ancient, and I mean really ancient. And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of it. Their brain literally cannot tell the difference between the emotional pain of you leaving and an actual physical injury. Seriously, brain scans show that the exact same regions light up as when someone, say, breaks a bone. To their brain, your departure feels like a real physical threat. Okay, so let's dive into that. We're looking at their brain on heartbreak, which is, for all intents and purposes, a primal survival response. Their entire nervous system is just screaming, danger, at the top of its lungs. The very first thing that happens is a chemical flood. Their brain gets swamped with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This is the exact same fight-or-flight cocktail our ancestors felt when they were abandoned by their tribe. To that deep mammalian part of their brain, being left is a life-threatening problem that has to be solved, like right now. Which brings us to a question we've all probably wondered about. Why does logical advice from friends, you'll be fine, there are other fish in the sea, why does it just fall completely flat? Well, it's because you can't reason with a nervous system that thinks it's fighting for its own survival. Logic has literally left the building. So let's go a level deeper and get to the why behind this insane reaction. We're looking at our primal programming here, specifically two core systems that get triggered, their attachment system and this incredibly powerful cognitive bias called loss aversion. So your departure basically hijacks the attachment style they probably formed way back in childhood. Those early patterns for how we connect. For someone with an anxious attachment, this means they cling even harder, they go into full detective mode. An avoidant person, they might seem totally unfazed, but really they're just processing the loss in slow motion, and they often pop back up months later. And then you've got the performer. They put on this big show of strength, secretly hoping you'll see just how great they're doing without you. Now, the second major force here is loss aversion. This is a fundamental principle in psychology, and it's a big one. It basically means that we are all hardwired to feel the pain of losing something about twice as powerfully as the pleasure we feel from gaining the exact same thing. This chart really puts that into perspective. The pleasure of getting together might register as, say, a +10 on the emotional scale, but the pain of losing that same relationship, it hits like a -20. It's a kind of emotional bankruptcy, and their brain will do pretty much anything to avoid that feeling. And this is a really crucial distinction to make. When they're desperately trying to work things out, a lot of the time, it's not really about saving the love you shared. It's about their brain desperately trying to avoid that massive, overwhelming psychological cost of the loss. Okay, so this intense need to avoid pain leads to a really fascinating next phase. Let's talk about the fantasy rewrite. This is how their memory actively starts to distort the past, turning it into a flawless highlight reel, all to cope with the pain of the present. Their brain basically turns into a romance novelist. First, it idealizes everything, creating this perfect highlight reel of your time together. Then, it conveniently forgets all the frustrations, all the arguments, all the real reasons you left. And finally, it enhances every single good moment, replaying them on a loop until the memory doesn't even look like reality anymore. And here is the truly wild part. The worse the relationship actually was, the more intense and distorted this idealization process becomes. You see it all the time. Really toxic relationships get rewritten in their minds as these grand, epic love stories because acknowledging the painful reality is just too much for their brain to handle. So it's so important for you to understand this. The version of you that they're missing, it's not real. It's a fantasy they've built. It's who they need you to be in that moment so they don't have to turn inward and look at themselves. All right, so now let's look at the next protective layer that kicks in, psychological self-defense. The best way to think about these are like emotional airbags that deploy automatically to protect their ego from the massive impact of this crash. And I bet you'll recognize some of these. There's rationalization, which sounds like, you know what, they were never right for me anyway. Then there's projection, where they make your leaving about your flaws.
They're probably just scared of commitment. And of course, there's good old denial, where they tell themselves, oh, this is just a temporary misunderstanding. We'll sort it out. But underneath all of this psychological theater, something much, much deeper is going on. Their very sense of self is fragmenting. A huge part of their identity was built around being your person. And without that, they're staring down a full-blown existential crisis. These defenses, they're just emergency protocols. But here's the twist. This crisis isn't just an ending. Let's move into our final section here, the power and the growth. This is all about finding the profound, hidden opportunity for transformation that's buried inside all this pain. So your departure triggers a few major shifts. First, that identity crisis we talked about. They have to relearn how to be an I instead of part of a we. Then there's the social disruption. Navigating mutual friends becomes a total diplomatic minefield. And finally, there's this massive power shift. By leaving, you've taken control, and for them, that can trigger a huge crisis of the ego. And all of this leads to what we can call the growth paradox. Your act of leaving, which feels like absolute destruction to them, actually creates the perfect, necessary conditions for a psychological breakthrough. A breakthrough that might never have happened if you had stayed. So what it all boils down to is this. Your departure forces them to finally confront the parts of themselves they've been successfully avoiding. They have to develop new emotional skills. They have to rediscover their own interests. They have to build a relationship with themselves, all the work that maybe they were quietly outsourcing to you. And this really shows you the ultimate potential of this incredibly painful experience. The most beautiful transformation happens when, someday down the line, they can look back and honestly thank you for leaving, because it was the catalyst that forced them to finally become the person they were always meant to be. Which leaves us with one last big thought. Is the act of walking away really an act of destruction? Or is it, perhaps, the most difficult but necessary gift you could ever give someone, the greatest and maybe only opportunity for their own liberation?